And we're live. Hey guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you know, this is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So, how's everyone doing? It's been a couple of days since we had a live stream. So, today I'm going to be covering the debate that, well, it's not a debate, it's sort of a conversation that John McWhorter and Glenn Loury having on the newest book by Ta-Nehisi Coates. So Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a book about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So he laid out his ideas on what he thought about the conflict, and there's been a lot of reviews on that book. And Glenn Loury has read the book, and John McWhorter hasn't read the book, and they sort of had a disagreement on the content of the book. And it seems like Glenn is much more sort of in favor of the points that Ta-Nehisi Coates was outlaying in that book, and John is not. Now, the very funny thing is that John hasn't read the book, but he's somehow so confident in his analysis about the book. He's so confident that he's right, as against Glenn Loury, who has read the book and has given his review. Right, someone like what do you call him, the kid, Coleman Hughes has also sort of written a review of the book. I mean, so anyway, I'm going to take the conversation. I'm just going to react to the conversation that Glenn Loury and John McWhorter had on that new writing by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and we'll see how it goes. So let me present it and let's go. No, not share video file. Come on. Share screen, yeah. All right. There we go.
Glenn, are you sure that, and I haven't read it, and so maybe I'm missing something, but boy, have I read a lot of reviews, including Coleman Hughes's in the Free Press, which was excellent.
I haven't
seen. Are you sure that Coates actually gives a principled justification?
So this is John McWhorter talking about admitting to the fact that he hasn't read the book, but he has read a lot of reviews, and somehow he's basing his opinions on the reviews that he's read. Why don't you just read the book yourself? I mean, it's not a very long book, according to what Glenn will say later on. But you're going to be reading reviews by people who you know somehow have a bias against Ta-Nehisi Coates. Coleman Hughes. I don't think anybody should take Coleman Hughes as a serious intellectual. I mean, the kid did have potentials, but he's just such a hack right now that everything he says is so predictable and makes very little sense. He has very, very shallow analysis that he does, especially on this Israel-Palestinian conflict. Dude is out of his depth. So no one should be quoting Coleman Hughes as an authority on anything, especially on this topic.
What I'm assuming is his opinion that Israel shouldn't have happened? Or does he cherry pick a few episodes from here and there? Does he make a real case that a public intellectual is responsible at his level of making? Does he appear to have done his homework?
I think he's going to be susceptible to that kind of criticism. He didn't go deep enough. He didn't read enough books. He doesn't know enough about Douglas Murray and him in a debate. Douglas Murray is going to throw the book at him. You don't know what you're talking about, but not. I wouldn't criticize his essay from that point of view. In a way, he kind of knows that he doesn't know all the way down, that he doesn't,
but his feelings are more important because he's
it's not his feeling. It's not his feeling. This is his position. His position is it's an apartheid state.
But does he address why?
And he's against apartheid. No, his position is that's wrong. So, I mean, if you watch these interviews, you've heard him use this device. He says, I'm against the death penalty. And I'm against it whether you're applying the death penalty to someone who stole a candy bar or you're applying it to someone who slaughtered 10 babies and then ate them. I'm against the death penalty. And therefore, when I see apartheid, and what I see there is apartheid, this is his position based on his experience. I see, and he describes in vivid detail aspects of what he's calling apartheid. I'm against that.
I'm not impressed.
And there's nothing the Palestinians.
Of course, I don't think anything is going to impress John McWhorter about Ta-Nehisi Coates because John is already biased against him. You haven't read the book. The person that has read the book is trying to explain to you, and you're like, I'm not impressed by it. Good and fine. What have you written about the conflict? What's your position? Now, this idea that Israel is not an apartheid state, people would want to say, oh, if it's an apartheid state, it has to be exactly like South Africa. No, it doesn't have to be exactly like South Africa for it to be an apartheid state. There are certain features that makes it an apartheid state, right? Israel essentially controls the West Bank and Gaza. But even let's leave Gaza, for example, out of it. Israel occupies the Gaza, and there are people, the Palestinians living in, the West Bank. There are people, the Palestinians living in the West Bank that do not have rights. They don't have voting rights. They don't have political rights. They don't have the rights of participation in Israeli society. Under the Israeli government, that is literally apartheid. Their homes can be destroyed at the whims of the Israeli government. Settlers can come in and do things to them, and they have no recourse to justice. That is an apartheid system. So it doesn't have to be quote for quote, book for book, what happened in South Africa for you to say this is an apartheid system. And for the fact that you have Palestinian Israeli citizens who have voting rights and all that, doesn't take away the fact that there are other Palestinians within that same territory who cannot vote, who do not have these rights. It's just like saying because during the time of slavery that there were a few free black men who also had slaves themselves. Therefore, that the US society at that time was not a slaveholding society. It literally doesn't make any sense. Exceptions are not the rule, right?
Palestinians could have done or are doing that's going to make me not be against that?
I'm not impressed by this at all. I find this a simplistic analysis of a very complex situation, calling it apartheid.
Now, this is one of the things that people who are out of their depth about this conflict usually bring up. Oh, it's a complex situation. No, it's not. It's a very, very straightforward situation. The very straightforward situation is that Jews were being massacred in Europe. Jews were being persecuted in Europe. They have been persecuted in Europe for a very long time, for hundreds of years, right? And they decided, you know what, we need to find a safe space, a safe place for ourselves. We need to create a place where we would be safe, where we will not be at the mercy of other people, of other nations that do not like us, right? And that's perfectly legitimate. I think it's something that they needed to do. But then they did it at the expense of another people, like paying Peter, robbing Peter to pay Paul, as you would say. You went to a place where people were currently living, right? Just because you said your ancestors had a kingdom 2,000 years ago on that same piece of land. Now there are current inhabitants living in that piece of land, and you're saying these people have to vacate their land. They just have to vacate because something that Europeans did to you somehow to get a redress to it, you have to tell other people to leave their land. It literally makes no sense. And then you are creating a state. You're not creating a state for everyone. You're creating an ethno state, a state that is exclusively for Jewish people, right? You might say, oh, well, the land was partitioned between Arabs and Jews, but the land wasn't yours to partition in the first place. Before 1948, Jews were less than 10% of the population of Palestine. So how can less than 10% of of the inhabitants of a place decide the fate of the place and decide to split the place whatever way they can? So it doesn't make any sense. It's a very simple situation. It's a land grabbing situation, right? It's not a religious war. It's a political war. It's a political conflict, one about land, one about territory. Humans have always fought over land and territory for a very long time. So it's understandable. But people try to say, oh, it's very complex. No, it's not. It's literally not. And then Israel has engaged in war with, the Palestinians to seize more territory since 1967. The West Bank, Gaza were taken over by Israel, Golan Heights, which belong to Syria. And the international community knows that. The international community regards Israel as being an occupying force in the West Bank and in the Golan Heights, and to an extent Gaza. So what is John saying? He doesn't understand anything about the conflict, but he's going to posture like he's an authority on it.
There's a certain music to it. Everybody jumps when you say it, just like he institutionalized the term white supremacy in the same way. But what would he suggest be done differently given the reason for this apartheid? It's very complicated. And I imagine that his idea would be, what a lot of this all comes down to is he thinks Israel shouldn't have been established, but What is his justification for that? Why should there not have been what's called a partition?
Now, this is another very stupid point that pro-Israeli people like to make. Saying end an apartheid state does not mean Israel should not exist. Why is John McWhorter slow? Saying end the apartheid government of South Africa, does it mean that South Africa should not exist? When people were calling for apartheid to end in South Africa, was that for the dissolution of the state called South Africa? Doesn't South Africa exist today? Calling for the end of apartheid is calling for the end of apartheid, giving equal rights to everyone within the territory controlled by a government. So it's a very stupid idea and it pisses me off that people would mischaracterize the argument in this way. There are some people who genuinely want the state of Israel to stop existing. I can say that happens. But most people are saying end this apartheid. That's not what they are. That's not their concept. That's not what's in their mind. They're not saying that Israel should stop to exist, that the Jews should leave the land. It's not possible. Israel exists and it should exist. But there are people who are stateless, who have been stateless for for decades, and that issue has to be addressed. And one of the ways of addressing that issue is either you have a two-state solution based on the 1967 borders, or you have a one state where Israel controls everything, but everybody has equal rights in one state. Now, there are many Palestinians who are even favorable to that one-state solution. In fact, because the people in Gaza were actually pushing for a one-state solution, one man, one vote, was why Israel pulled out of Gaza. Because they did not want to absorb that many Arab Palestinians, because they wanted to maintain the Jewish nature of Israel. But John McWhorter doesn't know any of this. He's so simplistic that I'm almost forced to say this guy needs to go out and touch grass, because he's just in his bubble.
There have been partitions all over the world. And I imagine that his reason would be because they're white and the Palestinians are brown. But does he?
John McWhorter is legitimately a moron. I would say this for a fact. And this is why I'll say he's a moron. You see this thing he just said, the reason why Ta-Nehisi is saying this is because, they are saying the Jews as white. And this is the example he makes every goddamn time. He doesn't have any other example than to reduce it to American version of, oppressed versus oppressed, oppressor versus oppressed, white versus brown, white versus every. That's his worldview. That's why he thinks that anybody who disagrees with him thinks. It's so simplistic. He thinks that those who are supporting the Palestinians today are supporting the Palestinians because they think the Palestinians are brown and the Israelis are white. So it means, they in their mind, they think white is bad, brown is good. Talk about ignorance.
Does he come out and say that, or does he just assume that we think that? Because that's a sloppy
why don't we circle back to this? I think you ought to read the thing that we're talking about, and then we can talk about it.
Exactly.
But I'm going to answer you directly. He is against the project of establishing a Jewish state. He does think that an ethnographic definition of statehood in a population that is heterogeneous is deeply problematic. And that's the...
And it is deeply problematic. I mean, I used to fall into this error before. I used to be a very staunch nationalist. I used to be a staunch ethno-nationalist, in the sense that I really wanted people who spoke the same language, belonged to the same ethnicity, to be together, to be in the same place. For a long time, I wanted Germany, Switzerland, Austria to be one country. I wanted China to take over Taiwan. I wanted, all the people who I felt, belong to each. I felt people should belong to themselves, right? But it's literally insane. That's not how the world is. Most countries are multi-ethnic countries. My country, for example, we have over 250 ethnic groups. Are we going to have 250 nations? The US, for example, is a melting pot of so many people. And before the formation of nation states, that's how people have lived. In the Roman Empire, you had multiple ethnicities. In the Ottoman Empire, you had multiple ethnicities. I am fundamentally against the idea of an ethno-state. I'm not against any state. I'm not against Israel existing as a state. I think it should exist, right? I am against the idea that this state exists for these people. And people would say, "Oh, but there are 100 Arab states." I am against Arab ethno-states as well. I'm against any Arab state which is exclusively for Arab people, where other people are being marginalized, where ethnic minorities are being marginalized. I don't like that either. So this idea that, this guy is
a moral starting point for his critique, but he employs, and I can hear Coleman critiquing this move that he makes, his experience as a descendant of slaves in the context of the United States, as a dominated people who have to deal with the subjugation, the stigma, the dehumanization, the relegation to the backwaters and the margins and the corners of society. And as a writer, as a moral agent in our time who has that history in his blood, quote unquote,
and he's not wrong in trying to lay out those parallels, because there are parallels. There are parallels, and stating it is not playing the victim. Facts are facts, whether you like it or not, whether they're convenient or inconvenient facts, right?
Say that I can't countenance silently what I am observing being perpetrated here. To me, you don't have to have an answer to be able to defend that position.
I think you do. And I am.
What should Israel do?
No.
Why is it my responsibility to have an answer to that question in order to be appalled at what Israel is doing?
No.
So
no.
I'm just going to say this, right? Does Israel have legitimate cause for? Let's look at this current conflict. Does Israel have legitimate cause for any military action in Gaza post October 7th? Yes. I mean, with what Hamas did, that was an atrocity. That was indefensible. Did the Palestinians have legitimate grievances prior to October 7th? Yes. But that does not justify what they did on October 7th. So also, does Israel have legitimate grievances that need to be addressed post October 7th? Yes, but that does not justify the current campaign that they are doing, where they're just decimating civilian population. It is so easy to understand, so easy to accept, but some people are so blind. Some people, especially the pro-Israel side, they're so blind, they will accept one part of that premise. They will accept that Israel is justified in responding to October 7th. But they are not going to accept that the Palestinians had legitimate grievances before October 7th. They're not going to accept that. They're going to just automatically assume that history began on October 7th, which is not true.
No, not with his influence. And given how much is written about this, how richly it's been discussed. He's not responsible for coming up with a game plan, but he's supposed to explain why he thinks that there should be no Israel, especially because in the same book, he says that we should embrace a mythology that we come from Egypt.
He doesn't say there should be no Israel. He says there should be no apartheid.
You see? Just do the damn work. Like, read, pick the book and read before you critique it, instead of straw manning someone. So imagine if Glenn hadn't read the book and Glenn was just going based off our assumptions. Both of them would have this idea, which they would tell to their millions of followers or thousands of followers, that Ta-Nehisi codes wants the state of Israel to stop existing. That's the idea that is going to go out there. Just because a man hasn't done his due diligence before he feels comfortable enough to critique the book written by someone. And then he's arguing with someone who has actually read the book. Isn't that insane?
But does he understand the history that's led to this apartheid? And then also, if I may...
I mean, as much as any well-read and intelligent person, and he is both of those things, could be expected to understand it.
And then...
So let me ask you, whatever it is that leads to apartheid, Does that justify an apartheid? Whatever situations lead to the creating of an apartheid state, does that mean that the apartheid state has it's okay to have an apartheid state because some extenuating circumstances happened to bring it about? This guy is slow.
In the book, he never mentions what happened on October 7th. Theoretically, because he wrote it after that happened, but he uses the passive voice, people were killed, etc. But apparently he thinks that anything Hamas does, the implication is that anything Hamas does is justified because, as you're putting it, or he would put it, they are enduring an apartheid.
This is him putting more words in the mouth of Ta-Nehisi Coates. And Glenn is just shaking his head. No. And this is what John does all the time. He just thinks up these fancy theories in his head and applies it to the person he's critiquing.
Which is not justified because whether or not Israel is trying to protect itself from being bombed out of existence through this apartheid, it's all moot because Israel shouldn't be there in the first place. Does he actually?
But Glenn just answered your question that he never argued that Israel shouldn't exist. You see why I say this guy is slow?
Lay out that argument? Or are we just to assume that there should be no Israel and that therefore he doesn't have to mention October 7th when a book drops a year after that happened? Genuine question.
Yeah, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm not here to defend Ta-Nehisi Coates. I think there's an interesting intellectual challenge to all of us, not just him, in our time about the deeply disconcerting moral dilemmas, tragic moral dilemmas that are raised by this historical development. And he's giving one man's, he is not a random person taken off the street. He is an influential figure. I agree. Mm-hmm. Account rooted in his identity, but also in his responsibilities as a writer and as a citizen in reaction to that. And I think it's worth kind of pausing for a minute about that because, a lot of Jewish Americans, a lot of Israelis basically agree with him about the moral challenge which this tragic historical evolution confronts us with.
So what is John going to say about the fact that many Israelis and many Jews agree with Ta-Nehisi Coates? He's going to say those Jews and Israelis are thinking of Jews as white and Palestinians as brown?
So I can only tell you this. I can tell you as a person who doesn't come in predisposed to like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who spent a lot of time reacting. I did read Between the World and Me. It's well crafted, but it rubbed me the wrong way in many respects, and I've said so. We've had our time here criticizing Ta-Nehisi Coates. I do teach his essay, The Case for Reparations, which is his signature long-form magazine journalism piece that kind of really solidified his reputation. And I have a lot of problems with a lot of what he has written and what he has done. But I picked this book up and put it down in the same day. And I thought, picked it up at the beginning and put it down at the end in the same day. It's a short book. And I thought, this is a fucking brilliant writer. The craft, it wasn't saccharine. It was silky, subtle, engrossing, captivating, really. Turns of phrase that I wanted to underline because I didn't not remember how enchanting some of the prose of the book is. And I thought, again, to have been a student of writing, directed by this guy, or to receive this book, having been his student, and to see this love of words enshrined in this way, and married to a kind of, you can argue about the moral motivations of it. And I, in another voice, I would be arguing about it. As I've said, this we that he easily invokes about Africanness is, I think, deeply problematic. But I thought, this is a serious person. So
now I really want to give kudos to Glenn for being the big man here, for admitting that he was premature in being dismissive of Ta-Nehisi Coates just because he didn't like his politics, just because he didn't like his views on race. To look at a man's brilliance, to look at his work and say, because I don't like what you're saying, that means you're not smart enough. That means you're not a serious person. And that's what John is doing. John is basically just dismissing him offhand. There are many smart people in their own right that may have dumb ideas, that may have ideas that you don't really agree with. They may have ideas that it might just be that they're not dumb. It might just be that, you see things from a different perspective. And the fact that Glenn has said, you know what, probably I was wrong in thinking this guy was nothing. And I had the same feeling when I read Ibram X. Kendi's book. I mean, I don't agree with many of the things Ibram X. Kendi, I don't agree with many of his ideas. But then when I read that book, it was a well-written book. The man could actually write. The man could really, really, really write captivating words, as in words that would get you glued to the book. It takes talent, it takes intelligence to do all that. So for you to just dismiss them and say, because I don't like their politics, I don't like their ideas on certain things, therefore they must be dumb, they must be stupid, they must be whatever you name it. And of recent, I did write on Substack, I did write a very scathing piece on Glenn Loury, right? I wrote something very critical of Glenn Loury, right? I'm able to write that and still say, yes, I'm correct. And I'm able to also, when I see him do something like this, I'm also able to say, this is a big man on this particular issue. Now, John McWhorter is going to say, oh, Ta-Nehisi Coates, no, he's dumb, is that. But even a broken clock is right once in a day or twice in a day, whatever you want to put it. So by that logic, is it possible that everything Ta-Nehisi Coates says or writes is going to be wrong? Let's say he's not, he's not right most of it. Is it literally possible for him to be wrong all the time? Could it not be possible that this is one of the few times that he's actually right? But John is just going to dismiss and dismiss and dismiss because he's so shielded from reality. He's just in his bubble and it's just in his word. And then he brings up his two examples of Omar and, oh, this person thinks white supremacy, white, and that's his worldview. That's the most he thinks about when critiquing people.
Well, I
want to say something else. I felt a little bit like chastising myself for being so dismissive of this guy because I didn't like his politics. I didn't like his racial politics in 2015-16. I didn't like his racial politics in 2020. I was on the other side. I'm the conservative, notes of a Black conservative over here. But I thought I wasn't really open-minded and fair in assessing the quality of the mind and the artistry of this guy. And I got to the end of that book, and when I put it down, notwithstanding his full-throated criticism of Zionism, I said, that's a brave dude there. That's a dude who's speaking his mind and speaking the truth that he thinks he's been given to know. And he's taking his career in his hands when he does so. And more power to him. I don't have to agree with him.
Glenn, I am utterly mystified. And
you're mystified because you don't know anything. You will be mystified because you don't think it's possible for Glenn Loury to agree with someone that he typically disagrees with. In this instance, it just shows how ideologically captured John McWhorter is. He's incapable of thinking about complexity of situations. He's thinking in a very binary white and black scenario. Ta-Nehisi is on this side of the aisle, so he must believe everything he says on this side of the aisle is wrong. I'm on this side of the aisle. That's his thinking.
Acknowledged in that I have not read the book yet. I am utterly mystified, and I don't mean that rhetorically. I'm sitting thinking that maybe I need to put my glasses on. I can't believe this is you saying this, and I'm trying to wrap my head around.
Why not, John?
Because
okay. Why not? Why is it possible for you not to believe that what Glenn is saying makes sense just because of the person involved?
Yes, he has a way with words, and I'm not minimizing that. Yes, he's a very good writer, and I see that you're admiring that. But my issue with him, frankly, has often been whether or not, I hate to say this, but I'll put it this way. I have never seen in him the frame of mind that tries to work out a problem, that looks at something that's complicated and tries to think out of the box, to figure out a solution or to figure out an explanation to go from A to B. It's always seemed to me that for him, the constant leitmotif, the constant theme is black, good, white supremacy, bad, I'm black.
That's you, John. That's your thinking. That's you thinking that's what he thinks. This is so simple and this is so stupid. John is unable to think outside of this framework. He's unable to look at this caricature that he's created of this other person. And why is it even necessary for Ta-Nehisi Coates to come up with a solution? It's not necessary for you to come up with a solution in assessing this situation. Apartheid is apartheid. Do you need to have a policy proposal on how to solve apartheid for you to recognize that it is apartheid? No, you don't. Identifying a problem, it's in itself a very crucial step to finding solutions to the problem. Just for the fact that you don't have the solution to the problem doesn't mean you cannot highlight that there is a problem. So his point here makes absolutely no sense.
That's everything. And so now he's applied that to Israel. But if you're going to look at something and call it apartheid and write artistically about that, that's one thing. But why the apartheid? When we call it a complex situation, I'm afraid that complex here means...
No, it's not complex.
That to simply diss Zionism right out, you have a case to make. And especially if you're him, I'll put it that way. He's not somebody who seems to me to make a case. And that's been true for his whole career. There's just a certain kind of feeling. And you and I used to agree about that. And I know that maybe I'm missing something. For example, I'm not terribly literary.
You're missing a whole lot. You're missing everything. I mean, actually pick up a book and read. Then possibly listen to other people. Listen to people that you disagree with. That'll help a lot. Do that, John, so that you can stop embarrassing yourself.
I probably read 6 fiction books a year. Usually 3 of them are ones that I've been told I have to read. I like to try to solve a problem. That's what linguistics is, although a lot of people have no reason to know.
So you read fiction books in a year. So what? What substantive knowledge does fiction books give to you? Reading 6 of them in a year. How is reading fiction going to help improve your knowledge on this complex situation of Israel? In the past year that this conflict has started, how many actual history books have you read on it? Oh, you're reading fiction books. And somehow it's complex.
You know that you're trying to come up with a solution to something. And that's what economics is. Well, And so maybe I'm just the wrong person.
No,
I'm going to read that book.
You're not the wrong person. You're just not smart. At least on this instance. On this instance, you sound slow.
But I'm really surprised that you are so willing to let pass the ratiocination that one would expect, given the richness of this topic. You're saying he's no Kendi. And I've always thought that.
So what now he's brought in Kendi again. I mean, this guy is so obsessed, or these guys are so obsessed with Kendi and quotes. They make it the point to mention them almost every other time that they have a conversation. They're just obsessed. I mean, leave these guys alone. You said everything that you've had to say about. This is why I say John McWhorter has only a handful of examples that he invokes. He has the Omar example, he has the white supremacy example, and he has the Kendi example. Those are the only things that he talks about. Every other thing is just trying to concoct things and create a caricature and then try to. Boy.
He brings more to the table than Kendi, certainly, but to do this whole thing, it's apartheid. And to say nothing about the 1,200 people who Hamas killed and the 200 more who were taken into captivity and, who many are dying now.
He's going to be stuck on this point. He's going to be stuck on the point that Ta-Nehisi quotes did not wail and say, oh, what Hamas did was an atrocity. It goes without saying that what Hamas did was an atrocity. It goes without saying. Any sane human being that saw that what happened on October 7th is going to tell you that this is crazy. I mean, I was so disturbed by the images coming out of that October 7th when the whole thing started. Any sane human being will tell you that, yeah, that's an atrocity. But he's so stuck on this point. He wants to be stuck on an academic point. He wants to be stuck on that Ta-Nehisi codes did not put a full. He didn't. This is Piers Morgan's. This is his version of Piers Morgan. Do you condemn Hamas? This is what he's doing. He doesn't have any substantive critique. He hasn't read the book. He doesn't know what's in the book. He's arguing with someone who's read the book, who is far more competent than him on this issue. He keeps saying the situation is complex. He hasn't tried to uncomplicate the situation since October 7th. John has been saying it's a complex situation. He hasn't tried to uncomplicate it.
That doesn't get one mention. I don't. That strikes me as almost willfully uncomplex. You're saying that there's something about this book that transcends all of that, and I'm open. I will read it this week. I'm going to write it down, make sure I do it.
Okay, why don't we circle back to this topic? I'm not going to try to respond to your disappointment in me for not being as
I'm sorry. I'm perplexed.
Critical, Kenny.
Perplexed.
We will revisit the subject and leave it at that for now.
Yeah, so I really do hope that they revisit it, and I really hope that they have a conversation on this again, because what John just displayed here shows his lack of understanding of anything. It shows how he's so simplistic in his analysis. It shows how he creates a caricature. He tries to make it seem as if it's not a straw man, but he likes to create a lot of straw men. He likes to say, oh, this is what this person is about. This is what this person thinks, without engaging in depth with the work of that person. So is this the quality of intellectuals? Is this what happens when intellectuals become YouTubers? They are unable to do the research. They are unable to do the hard work. I mean, people can probably go and look at his own works. People can look at McWhorter's works. Are they outstanding? Are they stellar? Or they're just popular because they're popular with a certain demographic, which is the right? Are they substantive? Are they well-researched books? Can they match up to the books of someone like Norman Finkelstein or some other very well accomplished public intellectuals. Isn't John out of his depth? Isn't he he's a lightweight? I'll say that he's a lightweight because he only has a few examples of things that he can talk about, nothing else. Oh, easy that this man has the effrontery to debate or to question someone who has read a book that he hasn't read. Anyway, let me just look at the comments that we've got here. I've got George. George, how you doing, George? George says John is making an opinion off of common news critique, not the way the book should be reviewed. Not the way a book should be reviewed. Exactly, that's not the way a book should be reviewed. Cracker says this is what happens when one side loses a war. Well, was it really a war, or was it, it's just simply sacking people, right? For a simplistic view of the Israeli-Palestinian issue, the land belongs to whoever is strong enough to take it and tough enough to keep it. The rest is an academic exercise. Well, we can say that, right? Which means that we're not going to question the Palestinians when they try to take it back. We're not going to say what they are doing is an atrocity, because if you say it's open to whoever is strong enough to take it, that's exactly what the Palestinians are trying to do. They're trying to take it back, and they're trying to take it by force of arms. If power is the only thing that matters, then we shouldn't even condemn what Hamas did on October 7th. If that's the case, we cannot be living like cavemen in the 21st century. There's a reason why there's international law. There's a reason why there are laws, right? These things might have been what was applicable in decades ago, hundreds of years ago, millennia ago, where people fight for territory. But in a civilized world today, such things should not be happening. People should not gain territory by force. That's why what Russia is doing in Ukraine is condemnable, because they are trying to withdraw international borders with force. Those things happened in the past. Territories always changed. There were parts of France, there were parts of Germany, and so on and so forth. But today, that's not how business should be done. If power is the only thing that matters, I repeat again, then nobody should condemn Hamas because they are playing the game of power too. But how are we able to comfortably say that Israel is in the right? They should, because they have the land now, they can take it. So let them take it. But those who are trying to retake it, when they are playing, both of them are playing the same game. Somehow, one is justified in playing that game, the other is not justified in playing that game. I don't accept this framing. I don't accept this framing that power is all that matters. No, I think there are laws. I think that as civilized human beings, we have to be able to have negotiations with one another to resolve conflicts, that we shouldn't always resort to violence to resolve conflicts. Clinton says that Israel only has the land because of the West, which is true. And he said Israel is not strong enough to hold the land without America, which is also true. And finally, said from the beginning, the land was handed over to them, which is also true. And the funny thing was that Theodor Herzl was actually negotiating with the Ottomans, who were Muslims. Zionists were given permission by Muslims to allow immigration to Palestine. Theodor Herzl literally went to the Ottoman government. He courted Muslim Arab leaders as at that time, because there were Jews in all parts of the Arab world. There were Jews living in different parts of the Arab. There were Jews in Iraq. There were Jews in Syria. There were Jews in Yemen. There were Jews in. I'm not going to say that their lives were stellar. Like, I'm not going to say that they had equal rights and equal footing as the Arab citizens of those lands, just as Arabs don't have in Israel right now. But they were participating in society. They were living reasonably okay. They were not as persecuted as they were in Europe, where there were pogroms here and there all the time. They were allowed to come into Palestine. So if the idea was that the Arab Muslims simply hated Jews for being Jews, no other reason, they were just anti-Semitic, it would not have been possible for them to live in Muslim lands for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years or 1,000 years. It would not have been possible for them to even allow Jewish migration into the land in the first place. They did not understand uh, what the Zionists were trying to do. And when they began to suspect this was that the Zionists were just going to be land grabbers, that's when the resistance started against the Zionists. And then people see that and say, oh, the Arabs just attacked for no reason. No, they saw what was happening. They saw that these people coming from Europe was going to be trying to create a state out of their land without their permission, without consultation to them, without asking whether this was what they wanted. So yeah, the land was basically given to them by Europeans. The British caused this problem. The West solved its anti-Semitism problem by shipping Jews to the Middle East. So this essentially is a problem for anti-Semitism. It was a genius move by the West. We don't like Jews. How do we get rid of them? Oh, there's a piece of land in the Middle East that they claim that their ancestors lived there and they would like to have that piece of land. Well, and also they're mostly European. Even though we don't like them, we like them better than the Arabs. So, let's send them there and let them be sort of a colonial outpost for the West in that region. That's exactly what Israel is. Anyway, that's what I have to say on this for now. Thank you guys for coming. Like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in another live stream. It's bye for now.